Something strange happened in 2021. The water at Rio Vista Park was diverted so repairs could be made to a structure beneath the San Marcos River. But when the water level dropped and exposed the riverbed, people discovered that there were no native animals left, only a single species of fish with a dark, sinister appearance. At first, they found only a few, then dozens. In the end, 406 armored catfish were pulled from a short stretch of river that takes just 2 minutes to walk, but they represented only a tiny fraction of the population. Texas Parks and Wildlife estimated that there were still around 4,600 armored catfish per kilometer in the upper San Marcos River. For years, a research team of more than 10 people, led by Dr. Joshua Perkin, had persistently tracked one of America's most hated monsters. The team tagged the fish, installed receivers along the river, and monitored every time they moved or disappeared. But the results only became more alarming. Their population continued to grow exponentially. Even America's $250 million mega project to eradicate invasive species had completely failed. But recently, researchers discovered large numbers of dead fish floating on the surface of the lake. The armored catfish had nearly disappeared. Of course, humans had not intervened. 3 native animal species had done it completely free of charge. One species can swallow 10 armored catfish at once. Another has a bizarre but highly effective hunting technique. And the final species is one that no one ever expected. You are probably already familiar with this armored catfish. Aquarium enthusiasts often keep them to clean algae from fish tanks. They do well in aquariums, but when irresponsible owners dump unwanted aquarium fish, these catfish are released along with them. The San Marcos River is like a giant aquarium. Clear water, stable temperatures, abundant vegetation, and endless algae. It is also the only place where Texas wild rice still grows naturally, and it provides habitat for many rare species protected by the federal government. Their population density has become far too high. They not only steal food from rare native species, but also have an extremely damaging impact on the river's geology. With their habit of digging burrows up to 1 meter long into earthen banks, millions of their tunnels hollow out the riverbanks, causing them to collapse and break apart when water rushes through. And that is not all. Concrete walls, reinforced rocks, bridge pillars, and bridge foundations built by humans have unintentionally become perfect new homes for them. Methods such as nets or fish-killing chemicals could harm native species. Meanwhile, the San Marcos River is a sensitive ecosystem with many species that need protection. Texas chose the most precise approach, divers using short-handled spears to eliminate the invasive fish one by one. Since 2013, Nick Menchaca has organized the largest armored catfish hunting competition in the United States. Participants dive around bridge foundations and concrete crevices to catch armored catfish and invasive tilapia, while also removing invasive snails and trash from the river. From 2014 to 2018, 6,046 armored catfish were removed. The hunting pressure increased their mortality rate by about 1.5 to 1.75 times, significantly reducing the population's overall biomass. But by around 2025, even though the total number of fish removed had exceeded 14,000, thousands still remained in the river. The method is precise, but it is too slow to keep up with their reproduction rate and ability to hide. To keep the population at a low level, hunts like these would have to be organized continuously, year after year. In January 2019, an unprecedented scene appeared along the San Marcos River. Dead plecos floated from Purgatory Creek all the way downstream to near Martindale, while vultures crowded the riverbanks. One resident, Hugh Fairley, found 17 fish on his property alone, and none of them had spear wounds. Local residents were thrilled. Had the invasion finally collapsed on its own? But it was not that simple. Researchers believe that heavy rainfall had pushed the tropical fish into colder sections of the river, causing them to die from thermal shock. However, many cases were also recorded suggesting that double-crested cormorants, river otters, and large predators such as gar had begun feeding on the armored catfish. Later, we will meet the species that hunts armored catfish more than any other. But first, remember why their disappearance is so remarkable. A pleco's body is covered with overlapping bony plates like armor, along with stiff spines on its dorsal and pectoral fins. When attacked, it spreads its spines and locks its body into a wide, sharp shape, making it extremely difficult for a predator to swallow. A largemouth bass may be able to bite a pleco, but it is often forced to spit it back out. If it tries to swallow the fish, the spines can become lodged in its throat and cause serious injury. The bony structure of the armor is both rigid and flexible, protecting the fish from teeth, rocks, and impacts in the current. In North American waters, adult plecos were once considered almost functionally invincible. So which species found a way to break through those defenses? Let's take a closer look at the alligator gar. Its scientific name is Atractosteus spatula, and it is one of the largest freshwater fish in North America. The gar lineage has existed since the age of the dinosaurs, and its body is protected by hard ganoid scales coated with ganoin, a substance structurally similar to tooth enamel. However, this ancient fish was once considered a trash fish by many Americans and was widely killed because people believed it was stealing game fish. Today, ecologists are beginning to see it differently. A large predator does not simply remove prey, it also helps maintain order throughout the river. An adult alligator gar can grow to nearly 3 meters long. It does not chase its prey like a bass. Instead, it remains motionless, approaches almost without making a sound, and then suddenly sweeps its long snout sideways, trapping the prey between rows of large teeth. Gar strikes so quickly that the entire bite can be completed in just a few hundredths of a second. The alligator gar's jaws are powered by large, jaw-closing muscles that generate tremendous crushing force. Combined with 2 rows of large, densely packed teeth, its mouth functions like a biological hydraulic press. It does not try to swallow a pleco alive or gulp it down whole. Instead, it holds the fish in its jaws and performs a series of bites and crushing movements underwater. The enormous pressure snaps the pleco's rigid dorsal and pectoral fin spines at their bony hinges, while crushing its interconnected armor plates into harmless fragments. From a morphological standpoint, the alligator gar is one of the few native fish large enough and equipped with the right kind of jaws to take on a pleco. Instead of sucking the prey directly into its throat, where the spines could become lodged, the gar bites across the fish's body, holds it in its jaws, and then turns it before swallowing. Biologists across Texas began catching enormous alligator gar with swollen bellies. Their digestive tracts were filled with thousands of fragments of crushed pleco armor. But no matter how intimidating the alligator gar may be, its body, which can reach 8 feet long, still limits where it can hunt. A 200-pound fish cannot enter a mud tunnel just 3 inches wide and 3 feet deep inside a steep riverbank. Alligator gar can only catch plecos that make the strategic mistake of swimming through deep open water. Clearer direct evidence appeared in 2014, when researchers examined an alligator gar measuring approximately 2.48 meters long. They found a 185 66-gram armored catfish from the genus Pterygoplictus in its stomach, along with apple snails, crayfish, and aquatic insects. The next predator does not need enormous jaws or the strength to crush through armor. It uses a more dangerous weapon, the ability to learn. It is the North American river otter, Lontra canadensis. At Volusia Blue Spring in Florida, plecos began appearing around 2002. According to park ranger Wayne Hartley, whose observations were recorded in a scientific study, otters and fish-eating birds initially tended to ignore this unfamiliar fish or immediately spit out any they managed to catch. That was hardly surprising. Plecos are protected by thick, bony armor and spines that can flare outward like fish hooks. To a predator encountering them for the first time, they did not look like food. They looked like living traps. But a few years later, that behavior began to change. The otters no longer gave up. They actively caught plecos, flipped them onto their backs, and bit into their less protected bellies. They did not try to break through the armored plates along the back. They did something smarter. They found where the armor ended. Like turning over a safe to attack its thinnest underside, the otters transformed a small weakness in the pleco's body into an entry point to all the soft tissue inside. In less than 30 seconds, they could reach its energy-rich flesh, fat reserves, and internal organs. After removing all the nutrient-rich soft tissue, the otters simply discarded what remained. They left behind the heavy skull, the spine-covered dorsal fin, and the outer shell of bony plates, tossing the empty biological armor back into the water, where it sank to the bottom. This was not an isolated behavior developed by a single, unusually intelligent animal. Field biologists recorded this behavioral pattern spreading like wildfire throughout entire otter families. Because mother otters invest heavily in the lengthy process of teaching their young, researchers observed them actively training their pups to use this flipping and peeling technique. Young otters initially made mistakes by biting into the plecos' spine-covered back, often leaving their noses bleeding and their paws punctured. Gradually, they corrected those mistakes by watching their mothers make a precise opening in the prey's belly. A family of river otters can process more than 50 armored catfish in a single day. Even more convincing evidence emerged in Guatemala. When scientists analyzed the droppings of neotropical river otters using radioisotope analysis, they found that in an invaded river, plecos had become the otters' primary food source, accounting for as much as 49% of their diet only 7 years after the fish first appeared. For ecologists, this was an encouraging sign. Nature could learn how to exploit a non-native species that had once seemed almost impossible to eat. But the results also contained a warning. In places where otters depended heavily on plecos, their diets became narrower and their trophic level declined. The invasive fish had become a food source, but at the same time, it might have been replacing the diversity of prey that had existed before. The otters have not eliminated the invasion, but they have proven that this seemingly impenetrable armor still has a weakness and that nature is intelligent enough to find it. Before we meet the final predator, there is something rather controversial about this species in Texas. For more than a decade, spearfishing had only cleared individual areas. Destroying burrows required too much effort, and tagging merely helped researchers understand where the fish were going. So, on the 23rd of January 2025, Texas approved a regulation allowing permits for the commercial harvest and sale of armored catfish from the genera Hypostomus and Pterygoplecthus in public freshwater. The rule took effect on the 24th of March 2025 after pet food manufacturers expressed interest in using the fish as a raw material. Previously, every fish caught created additional transportation and disposal costs. Once there was a buyer, however, it became a product capable of generating revenue. If the sale price could cover labor, fuel, and processing costs, removal efforts could continue without relying entirely on conservation funding. But this is not unrestricted fishing. TPWD issues permits only for specific locations, species, and fishing gear, and any species not covered by the permit must be released. Texas is testing a bold reversal, turning the invasive species itself into a source of funding for the fight against it. Finally, the predator that makes armored catfish vulnerable does not have crushing jaws, nor does it use skillful paws to flip its prey over. It attacks from above the water, the double-crested cormorant. This is a fish-hunting bird capable of diving deep, chasing prey with its powerful legs, and steering its body underwater like a living torpedo. After each hunt, cormorants often stand on tree branches or rocky banks with their black wings spread wide in the sun. That strange posture makes them look like prehistoric creatures drying themselves by the river. But their most remarkable technique happens before they swallow a pleco. An ordinary fish can often be swallowed as soon as a cormorant catches it. Plecos are different. Their bony armor makes their bodies as rigid as metal boxes, while the spines on their dorsal and pectoral fins can flare outward and catch in a predator's throat. Swallowing one alive is like trying to swallow a thrashing fishhook. Cormorants have found a way to reduce that danger. At Volusia Blue Spring in Florida, biologist RegenEco directly documented 3 separate cases of double-crested cormorants capturing armored catfish from the genus Pterygoplecthus. In each observation, only one bird was involved. It dove underwater and resurfaced with a fish about 10 to 20 centimeters long in its beak, but it did not swallow it right away. The bird began violently shaking its head, whipping the fish back and forth, and repeatedly slamming it against the water's surface. At times, the prey slipped from its beak, but the bird immediately grabbed it again and continued. The process lasted several minutes until the fish had almost completely stopped struggling. Only then did the cormorant turn the prey into the proper position and swallow it whole. It was a brutal but precise strategy. The bird did not need to break through the armor. It used the surface of the water itself like an anvil, exhausting the fish and reducing the chance that its spines would flare outward inside the bird's throat. For a species that had once caused many predators to spit it out, being swallowed whole was clear proof that its armor no longer guaranteed absolute safety. However, all 3 fish that were observed were juveniles. They were smaller, lighter, and did not yet have the fully developed armor of adult individuals that can grow to many tens of centimeters long. So it is still too early to say that cormorants regularly handle the largest plecos, and there is certainly no evidence yet that a flock of birds could cause the entire population to collapse. But killing juveniles may matter more than it first appears. An adult fish may already have reproduced through several breeding seasons. A fish eaten before reaching reproductive age will never dig a burrow, lay eggs, or produce hundreds of new individuals. Cormorants do not need to kill every pleco. They only need to stop enough of them before they mature. After more than a decade, humans have learned how to find them with tracking equipment and kill them with spears. Otters have learned how to attack the less protected belly. Alligator gar have proven that the armor can still end up inside a predator's stomach. And cormorants have turned the water's surface into a weapon for dealing with juvenile fish. No single species has ended the invasion on its own. But each piece of evidence shows that the ecosystem is changing. Native predators no longer see plecos as something unfamiliar. What had frustrated multi-million-dollar government projects was quietly but thoroughly addressed by the self-regulating power of Texas's native ecosystem. Human arrogance often reveals itself most clearly in the way we respond to environmental crises. When a riverbank collapses, our first instinct is to approve a budget, bring in excavators, and pour thousands of tons of concrete. We assume that nature is a broken machine that can continue to operate only through technical intervention. But what happened in Texas proved the opposite. An expensive concrete wall can protect only a few hundred meters of riverbank before natural currents gradually erode and destroy it. Meanwhile, a healthy otter population, a river where alligator gar are allowed to thrive, or old-growth trees preserved as nesting sites for predatory birds, can help maintain the balance of an entire watershed stretching across thousands of kilometers. Nature does not necessarily need costly mechanical structures. What it needs is time and, most importantly, for humans to stop violently disrupting ecological relationships before native species have the chance to adapt and find their own solution. In reality, this battle still cannot end. Plecos possess another ability that makes them even harder to control. They can move across land. When out of the water, they do not crawl like mud skippers or wriggle like snakeheads. Instead, a pleco braces its body with its mouth, fins, and tail, then pulls itself forward using a movement so unusual that physiologist Noah Bressman and his colleagues gave it a new name, reffling. This ability allows plecos to cross damp ground, escape from a drying pool, and potentially reach new habitats. It also explains why clearing one section of a river does not mean the invasion is over. After more than a decade, spearfishing has removed thousands of individuals and reduced their biomass in areas that are regularly controlled. But when those efforts stop, fish from other areas can still return. For humans, there is no clear finish line. That is why, beginning in 2023, scientists shifted their attention to studying the genomes of pleco populations in 4 spring-fed rivers in central Texas. They analyzed how closely the populations were connected, their sex ratios, and whether genetic technology could be used to reduce reproduction or cause localized population collapses. However, this is still only research, not a program that has been deployed in the rivers. Genetic analysis has also failed to identify a simple sex determination mechanism that would make the supermale concept a practical solution. And even if such technology existed, major questions would remain. How could genetically modified fish be kept within a single river? What would happen if they escaped? Who has the authority to decide that an entire population should be eliminated? From a pet fish worth only a few dollars, Texas is now considering genetic technology to repair the consequences of a release that once seemed harmless. The story of the pleco does not end with a complete victory. Humans have used spears, tracking devices, genetic research, and even the market to reduce their numbers. Meanwhile, gar, otters, and cormorants have begun learning how to turn the invader into food. But nature cannot repair human mistakes overnight. Every fish released from an aquarium can become the beginning of an invasion lasting for decades, consuming enormous amounts of effort and transforming an entire ecosystem. The most remarkable thing is not that plecos are unbeatable, but that native species still have the ability to observe, adapt, and fight back. What do you think? Should humans continue to intervene aggressively, or should we give nature more opportunities to restore its own balance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy true stories about how nature repairs what once seemed impossible, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next journey.